Hi everybody. Okay, here we go with 9.2, the second half. This is learning the imparfait. Before we do the imparfait, I want to do a small review of the past tenses that we already know. The first is the passé composé. That has two verbs. Your first verb is going to be avoir or être, and your second verb is going to be the past participle. We talked earlier, I guess last chapter, in chapter 8, about doing agreement when you have être based on the gender or number of the subject. The passé récent, we've also done recently, that also has two verbs, but instead of having your first verb be avoir or être, your first verb is venir. And then your second verb is the infinitive. Instead of the past participle, you'll have a little de in between. So I wanted to give an example of each of those just to be clear that you guys remember what those look like. So I'll use the same verb for the sentence. Let's say that I'll use finir. For finir, I'm going to use avoir because it's not in my song on my list. J'ai fini. And maybe I'll finish my sentence off with les devoirs. J'ai fini les devoirs. That's passé composé. If I was going to do this in passé récent, with finir, my first verb is venir. Je viens. Then I get my little de in there. And then finir as the infinitive. And then finally, les devoirs. Okay? So just to make sure that we're really, really clear on this, passé composé uses avoir and the infinitive. Avoir and the past participle. Whereas, let's see, your passé récent will use venir and the infinitive. So notice that R there, and you have that little de in the middle. Okay? Let me give you another example. For passé composé, this time with être. Je suis, and maybe let's use aller. If you're a female person, then you'd add an extra E, so I'll just put in parentheses. For me, obviously, if I were truly writing, I would take off the parentheses because I identify as female. But je suis allée, and then I'll say à la bibliothèque. Okay? The reason why I chose être here was because my aller is in my song or in my list. Doing that same verb, that same sentence, but this time in the passé récent, I would say je viens. D'aller, remember that D apostrophe there because of the vowel, à la bibliothèque. Okay, so once again, I have être plus my past participle, and this time I got agreement with that E there. Versus when I'm doing the passé récent, I'm going to have venir plus my infinitive and my little sneaky de right in the middle. So those are the two that we already know and feel comfortable with, hopefully. The next one that we're learning this chapter is called the imparfait. It's another past tense. Instead of it having two verbs, like the passé composé and the passé récent, it will only have one. And if we go into our book and we look at this dialogue here, we can see that. So I'm just going to highlight each time. Let's see, maybe I'll use this color. Okay. So every time I have a subject, one subject, I'm going to get one verb. Okay. The monsieur here is my subject, so therefore I'm going to get parler, one verb. C'était is my subject, or ce is my subject. Était is my one verb. Je, subject, était. Tu, étais. Tu, voyageais. Je, faisais. Mon père, traversait, etc. So if you look at this, you'll notice, you might recognize some of the verbs, like voyager, for example, or faisait, or traverser, or parler. You might recognize those a little bit, but you'll see that it's just one subject and one verb. So how do we do that? How do we get those correct endings and conjugate this correctly? So what we're going to do here for the imparfait is pretty easy. In fact, I find it to be easier, probably the easiest of all of our past tenses. In order to form it, though, we have what's called a split. No, I guess we don't have a split root for this, sorry. You'll take your new form of the present, okay? And you're going to take off the ONS first. That's going to get us our root. So for example, let's say that I had parler. I'm going to take my new form first. Okay, and I'm going to take off O and N and S. This right here is going to be what I use for my root. And I'm going to add that then for all of my conjugations here. So for imparfait, for parler, I would have je parle as my root, and then my ending is going to be, let's choose a different color here, AIS, je parlais. If I'm going to do tu, I once again use that same root coming from the new form, and I'll add ending AIS, tu parlais. Il or elle, same root, il ou elle parle, and my ending is AIT, elle parlait. So these three, parler, 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 will all sound the exact same. A little bit further, oops, let's do the new form. I'm going to keep that same root. My ending here is IONS, nous parlions, and I will say that I. For vous, use the same root, parle, and my ending is IE. And the last one is going to be il or elle plural. Same root. And the ending is AIENT, parler. So in fact, my conjugations for, let's do pink, for everything inside of the boot will sound the same. Je parlais, tu parlais, il parlait, and il plural, il parlait. Parler, 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 parler. For the nous and the vous form, you will hear that little I, so nous parlions, vous parliez. The great thing about imparfait is that this rule of just taking your new form in the present and then adding those endings is going to apply to all of our verbs, including all of our irregulars. The only one that is different, and it is an irregular within the imparfait tense, is être. So I'm just going to start here. Être is my only irregular. Instead of my new form being nous sommes, right, that's from my present tense, well, I can't drop off an ONS here, so I can't use it at all. What I'll do instead is I'll use the new root, which is ate, and then I'll add my endings onto it. So for example, I will say j'étais, tu étais, il or elle était with a T. Nous étions. Vous étiez. And ils étaient. Once again, inside of my boot, all of those will be pronounced the same. J'étais, tu étais, il était, ils étaient. And I will do my little liaison here. Okay? So that's your only one irregular. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to go back and review all of your present tense verbs from before, specifically looking at the new forms and making sure that you've got those down pat, because that's going to be your root for your imparfait. Okay. The next part is understanding when do we use each of these tenses. The passé composé is for an action that has a very finite start and stop action. It's usually something like a series of actions, like I woke up, I brushed my teeth, I went to work. The passé récent can be similar, but it has the idea of being very, very recent, as in I just did something. The imparfait is for a couple of reasons. It can be for descriptions, it can be for habitual actions, but these are a little bit more open-ended than your passé composé. So if we look in our book, we'll go down to this part, and this is a really good description of when we use the imparfait. For this chapter right now and up through the test, you will not be tested on understanding when to use passé composé versus imparfait. That will be next chapter, but this is good for just an idea on how exactly to do this and when to do it. So, number 1, you'll use it in descriptions to set a scene. C'était une nuit tranquille à Paris. Il pleuvait et il faisait froid. Okay, so it was a quiet night, it was raining, it was cold. So this is description or scene setting, or what we also call exposition. Okay, it's general description. The next time that you can use it is number 2 for habitual or repeated actions. When I was young, well, when you were young is not a very specific time, right? It's not like one day you were young and one day you were old the next day. It's just a generalized in the past sort of open-ended idea. So that already is going to give you the imparfait. And then you will have j'allais. So you'll actually see this here. If we get a little bit closer, the été here is already your imparfait, sorry. And then aller. I went there every Sunday, tous les dimanches. So anytime that you have an indicator that says habitual or repeated, you're going to probably be using imparfait. All right, the next time you might use it would be to describe a feeling or a mental state. Number 3. Cécile était très heureuse, elle avait envie de chanter. In fact, the verbs être and avoir very, very often are using the imparfait because those are the verbs that either describe a state of being, which is sort of like a mental state, or they describe a feeling of some sort, like avoir envie, avoir besoin, avoir peur. Okay? Telling the time of day, the date, or to express age in the past. It was Saturday, c'était samedi. Il était 5h30. So once again, you're noticing that être and avoir are big time in the imparfait most of the time. The 5th, to describe appearance and physical traits, okay? He was wearing jeans. So that's just simply because you're describing their state at that time. So you can kind of link that back into maybe number 3, describing feelings or mental states. In this case, it's a physical state, but it's something that is happening over a long period of time. It's not a start and finish action. Finally, to describe an action or situation that was happening when another event interrupted it. So oftentimes we'll have, I'll draw a little continuum here. You have an action, it's happening here, okay? And all of a sudden, boom, you've got an action that stops here. It stops you from even being able to continue this action. So, oops, that's interesting. I didn't really want that to erase the whole thing. So it kind of will just break this whole activity here. So boom. So this thing over here was my imparfait action. Okay, like was walking, for example. I was walking. And then this red action is going to be your passé composé. So for example, that would be something like Superman swept me off my feet. Okay? So the imparfait action is the thing where you were doing it before and then it ended up getting interrupted by the passé composé. Okay? We will be going through a lot more of this when we get to the next chapter, but there is some vocabulary that would be really good to know for you guys, specifically for describing things that are happening in the past as habitual actions. And that is really any word where you have tous les or toutes les. Tout means all. And you have the les because then you're describing what time period you're repeating. Tous les jours, tous les après-midi, tous les matins, tous les soirs, toutes les semaines. The difference here is just masculine versus feminine. Other adverbs that use the imparfait include the following: d'habitude, which is as a rule or habitually, en général, and souvent. All of these words will somehow indicate that you have something going on repetitively even if it's in the past. And so therefore, you're going to use the imparfait. Okay? Another way to kind of remember it is in terms of translation. Okay? The passé composé will oftentimes sort of have that ed, as in I walked, I studied. Okay? Or you have an irregular like I ate. Okay? But it's a finite action. Versus the passé récent will have the idea of just blanked, as in I just walked, I just studied, and I just ate. And finally, the imparfait often is described as was blanking or used to blank. For example, I was walking. That would be something that maybe gets interrupted, like I was walking when Superman swept me on my feet, or every day I used to walk. Okay, for studied it might be I was studying when the electricity went out. Or I used to study, what did I used to study? I don't know, I used to study math. And maybe as a last one for eating, just to finalize our examples here. I was eating when the partner of my dreams walked up and gave me their number. Or I used to eat pineapple and then I realized that I was allergic. Something like that. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop there. We're going to have plenty of exercises that we do in class with the imparfait, but the most important thing for you guys to be doing before you come to class is making sure to review your present tense verbs, specifically in your new forms. So I'll write, where are you going to find that information? You're going to want to go to Canvas, and you're going to want to go to our modules, and you're going to want to go to the bottom. You're going to scroll to the bottom very far, and then you're going to find a verb review, okay? And it will be through chapter 14. Of course, we're not on chapter 14, but already you have pages 1, 2, and a little bit into 3, okay? Make sure that you are going back and studying your new forms, especially on those, okay? Because you will see that some of them are irregular, and that's what you're going to have to use. So for example, like if I had an IR verb, if I was regular, my new form would be finissons. I'd take off ONS. This is my root, okay? Versus an irregular, like for example, boire. My new form is buvons. Take off ONS. This is my root, buve, okay? So go back, study your new forms very, very hard. And then you're going to want to memorize those endings. Remember, those endings are AIS, AIS, AIT, IONS, IEZ, AIENT. I would recommend writing those down multiple times. And then, of course, your only irregular, your only irregular is that être form up here, okay? So just going to kind of lasso that so you can sort of see that, all right? So that is it for today. I will see you guys in class. Talk to you soon.